Alright, we're here today in the Pokemon Showdown Team Builder to talk about the Terastal phenomenon, or Terastallizing, or Terra types, or whatever you want to call them. And we need to talk about how they will impact the metagame, specifically from a singles perspective, and why I believe that they will be banned, unfortunately, from the Smogon metagame. So let's first of all talk about what the Terastal phenomenon means specifically for a singles player compared to a doubles player. In a single 6v6 matchup, I have 6 Pokemon on my team, and when I go into my team builder, or when I go to breed or cartridge games or whatever, I have to choose which type I'm going to put on a Pokemon before I go into the battle, right? So I can't just decide to turn my Pokemon into a given type in the middle of the battle. I have to pre-decide it, and so does my opponent. So this is a good limitation, because otherwise Terastallization would just be complete chaos. But limiting the Pokemon to only one type does, in theory, restrict the possibilities to an extent. Now, one limitation further that has been suggested in other places is that perhaps if at the beginning of the battle I could see what my opponent's Terra types were, right, on team preview, if I could see what types they could turn into, then I could keep that in the back of my head and take that into account. But unfortunately, the Game Freak has made that pretty clear that is not the case, that you can take your opponent by surprise by Terastallizing into a type that will beat them, right? They showed off the Tyranitar versus Gallade in the video, and the Tyranitar turned into a ghost type and surprised the Gallade. Now, you could say, well, they just were surprised by the timing. They weren't surprised by the type. No, they were surprised by the type. And today, they tweeted out a tweet, as they do, right? Just for advertising purposes, but they reiterated that idea that you can keep your Terra type hidden from your opponent, and I won't know what it is until I go to close combat you, and now you're a ghost type. So that's not going to be the case. We're going to go into a battle basically blind as to what Terra type our opponent has, which is unfortunate. Even if maybe you sort of had a mist pop out of when the Pokemon came out of the Pokeball that gave an indication as to what their Terra type could be. That could be something, right? Sort of like how in Showdown, when you play Camomons, you don't necessarily know the typing of the Pokemon going into the battle on Team Preview, but when the Pokemon is sent out, it does tell you the type right there, right? Because then at least it would sort of be like Greninja versus Ash Greninja, where at the beginning of the battle, I don't know which one it is until it's used a Protean move, or if the trainer forgot to make it a male, not shiny Greninja, I'll know that it's Protean right off the bat, but only once I see it, right? That kind of thing could be more permissible, more acceptable, even though then I still think it would be sort of busted. But the fact that I have no clue going into a battle what my opponent's type is the main big problem in my mind. That, and of course, I don't know which one we will Terastallize. But that goes more to Dynamax, because in Dynamax metagame, we knew that you could Dynamax any of your Pokemon. You just didn't know which one and when. But as the metagame progressed, and as it sort of still progresses now in Dynamax, in Ranbat specifically, you can sort of get a feel for when would be a good time for your opponent to Dynamax, when is a good time for me to Dynamax. And at least the timing part and which Pokemon will do it becomes a little more apparent as you gain a bit of experience. But with Terastallizing, I think a lot of that goes out of the window. And the most important one is that I don't know what you're going to do once you Terastallize. So to illustrate this, because some of you might not be convinced by my reasoning, I went ahead and I created a sample team. We don't know which Pokemon are going to be coming to Scarlet and Violet, and we also don't know what new Pokemon are going to be in the game or what their capabilities are. So take this with a grain of salt, but I do believe that Pokemon is still Pokemon at the end of the day, and the same basic principles should apply across generations. So I took Pokemon that are currently OU, or in Alakazam and Gyarados' case, they can be used in OU technically, even if they're not optimal. And I just said, okay, we're going to put these on a team. Even if this isn't what OU looks like in Gen 9, OU and Gen 9 will still use the same working principles that a team today would still operate under. We can still illustrate our points even if the Pokemon aren't exactly what they will be in Gen 9. So, the first team here is just what I believe would, in theory, be one of the better types for these Pokemon. So Gyarados with the Terra type of flying would be a very good candidate because Gyarados has previously struggled with having flying stab. The only times that it can ever use it really is in Dynamax, because Bounce is being its only physical flying move. Now becomes Max Airstream, which is spammable and has an incredible secondary effect. But outside of that, then you have to use Bounce normally, which is a really bad move, or Hurricane, which is coming off of this pathetic 60 special attack stat. So not really a good option there either. So flying is a really good option for Gyarados, depending on the base power of Terra Blast, which admittedly we don't know at the moment. But that is an option for Gyarados, and because Gyarados is already flying type, it will get super adaptability, or whatever you want to call it, on flying moves. So even if Terra Blast is only like 80 base power, that's still actually going to be a decently strong move coming off of Gyarados. So this is one option that I think we could see for Gyarados, and that would be pretty standard. Next up, we've got the Ferrothorn. Ferrothorn does rely a lot on its defensive Grass-Steel typing. Grass and Steel as a combination is really good defensive typing, and you might not want to give that up. However, if I am trapped by a Magnezone and I have the Ground Terra type, I could toss on Bulldoze, or maybe even just Terra Blast myself, and all of a sudden, away goes Magnezone, right? Unless Magnezone specifically brought Grass Terra type and Terastallizes on the same turn that I Terastallize, and then even then I'm not trapped because I'm no longer a Steel type. I would be trapped on that turn specifically because I wouldn't have become a non-Steel type until that turn, so I would be trapped for at least one turn. But at the very least, I could blow back Magnezone if they didn't Terastallize themselves with a ground move. So I think this is a really strong option for Ferrothorn, and ground type isn't a bad defensive typing, right? Many ground types take the role of a defensive backbone on a team, so I don't think that Ferrothorn would lose overly much by Terastallizing into a ground type. So that would be pretty standard in my opinion. Next up, we've got Toxapex. Toxapex probably does not want to Terastallize at all, because Toxapex has really fantastic defensive typing, can absorb T-Spikes, it gets stab boosted Scalds, and it gets Toxics that don't miss. And it also, beats a lot of relevant would-be threats like Keldeo, for instance, right? The water is fantastic defensive typing, Poison is a fantastic defensive typing, especially for fighting types. You don't want to lose that. But if you have to lose it, well, not a bad option to go with Steel, just because Steel is a decent defensive typing. It's not maybe the best option, but it's not bad. One of the reasons why Steel is okay for Toxapex is because you can't be poisoned still, and you don't want to get toxic on your Toxapex, right? That would be sort of embarrassing. So Steel, not a bad option. Next up, we got Alakazam with Fighting. With Terra Blast, Alakazam will finally have Fighting Stab, if it Terastallizes into the Fighting type, that is not going to miss, right? It's not Focus Blast. And I think that is a amazing thing for Psychic types. The ability to have the Terra Blast of Fighting. However, it's only going to be Fighting Terra Blast if you Terastallize. So I could see a lot of Psychic types just straight up going Fighting type instead. And you run Psychic, Psyshock, Terra Blast, maybe you put on Thunderbolt or something instead of Psyshock here. Something that just makes you a terrifying special attacker but instead of thinking of Alakazam as a psychic attacker, you think of it as a fighting attacker instead. And I think that could be really interesting. Next up, we've got Weavile, which I think could use Steel as one option. Steel means that you're not going to resist something like Mach Punch is still going to hurt you. But Bullet Punch, you would resist, and you'd also resist dragon moves from like Dragapult in case they decided to drop Draco trying to kill you. You'd resist U-Turn for the dark types. So, it's not a bad option, and you can run Terra Blast here. The other big one, of course, Steel type does resist Fairy, which the dark type also struggles with. So that would be the main reason to run it, in my opinion. Finally, we've got the Heatran, and I think you'll see a lot of grass-type Heatrans. You go out into Swampert on my Heatran, and I'm pretty sure Swampert's not going to be in the game, but maybe Gastrodon, or Quagsire, or just fill in blank whatever Pokemon would normally be Heatran that's water and ground. There's lots. And instead, now I'm a grass-type, and I don't even have to use Solar Beam with Power Herb or Z-Move or whatever, because now I have Terra Blast. And you're 4 times weak to that grass move, boom, you're dead. Okay. So I think you're going to see quite a few grass Heatrans. I think Heatran is going to be a fantastic Pokemon if it comes back, because it always is a fantastic Pokemon, and it'll have multiple options, sort of like it did with Z Crystals, but I think grass will be a strong contender. So this is one team composition that you could have. I'm not saying this is a good team. I just threw this stuff together as I was looking through the Pokemon and what I thought would be interesting to talk about. But let's say that you saw this team, and in your head, this is what you thought their Terra types would be, just based off of past experience or whatever. Well, let's look at another team now. This is an equally, in my mind, plausible team as to what the Terra types could be. So now we have a Water Gyarados instead of a Flying one, just getting rid of Terra Blast, because maybe Terra Blast isn't that powerful, or maybe it doesn't really struggle with having grass types, and so I don't want to be a flying type. I want to be a water type, and I'm going to use Waterfall and Earthquake and Power Whip, and it's going to be a really strong water attacker now. Okay, you don't know which Terra type I'm going to turn into. Then we could have a Steel type Ferrothorn, right? Instead of going with ground, which I think that 90% of Ferrothorns probably would end up being, I'm going to double down on the Steel type, and I'm going to say, no, I am Steel type, dang it. And I'm going to start running a Cursed Body Press set on this set with Gyro Ball. And I can Gyro Ball things into oblivion with my Super Stab, Zero Speed, Brave Nature Gyro Balls. And that's going to be actually a sort of scary offensive Pokemon. And the Cursed Body Press here, I guess, is from Magnezone or whatever. I could run a Poison Toxapex, again, so I don't get poisoned. And have Super Stab Poison Jabs so that I can bop things like Calm Mind Tapu Fini or Clefable. That could be problematic. What if I gave Alakazam the ground type, specifically for things like Heatran, right? Instead of having to worry about Focus Blast, shoddy accuracy, instead I can run a ground move, and Dazzling Gleam would go in this slot to hit things like Hydreigon specifically. So that would be also quite threatening. We could give Weavile Super Stab Ice and give it Ice Charge Triple Axle, right? This would be a very powerful Weavile set. And then similarly with Heatran, we could give it Super Stab and give it Terra Blast and or Flash Cannon and or Heavy Slam, depending on what is the most powerful for it. But I don't have to necessarily defensively change Heatran's typing. I could give it the Steel typing, which maybe you wouldn't even think of necessarily. But if I felt like this team struggled against Fairy types, I could totally do that, right? Another one I could do, what if I decided to make Gyarados a Rock type? Well, you didn't see that coming, did you? Right? I could have made Gyarados also a ground type and given it an Earthquake and made it a ground attacker as well, and then you would have gone for an electric move. But I chose to do Rock type here just because I thought that would be interesting. Right? Why Rock specifically? Because it'll hit Zapdos. That's the main thing I was thinking of when I did this set here. Zapdos come in, you want to use Ice Fang, well that's cute, now you're going to get static. Well, if Terra Blast's physical version doesn't make contact, like I don't think it will, because it's the same move for both physical and special, so it probably won't make contact. then Terrablast is going to hit Zapdos without making contact. Rock would be great. It's super effective. That would be a really scary one to contend with as well, and Rock would resist the Hurricanes. Of course, you still have to deal with Discharge if the ground typing would maybe be better there, but then you can't hit it without getting static, I think. So I think Rock type Gyarados would be scary. Let's say I want to do a Grass type Ferrothorn with Power Whip and just keep it as a Grass type, sort of like a Ferrothorn kind of thing. That could be something. I could even make my Toxapex a Flying type. Why? Well, why not, right? Do note one thing here. I've given the Toxapex Leftovers item. I have not given it the Black Sludge item. And I think that going forward in this generation, the Black Sludge will not be a good item anymore. I think that you do not want to run Black Sludge in Generation 9. If you are a Poison type and you want to Terastallize into something that is not a Poison type, then you need to run Leftovers, or because you would otherwise take damage from your Black Sludge once you Terastallize, and that'd be bad. Then, if you are a Poison type that doesn't want to Terastallize, or a Poison type that will Terastallize into a Poison type, then keeping Black Sludge will give that away. So I think that if you're a Poison type and you happen to want to have Recovery, like Leftovers to Black Sludge, Leftovers is the correct item. There aren't many Pokemon that are using Trick nowadays, not Gen 5 anymore, and I don't think the Black Sludge will be a very good item anymore, unfortunately. Because it was a really cool item, it just won't be good in Gen 9. So keep that in mind. But Toxapex, I don't think, like I said before, that it wants to Terastallize, but why not a Flying type? Like a sort of a Tornadus Therian kind of situation, right? Next up, we could have Alakazam go all in on its Psychic typing and have an Expanding Force set. Maybe this set in particular doesn't want Expanding Force because there's nothing on the team to give it Terrain. But if this were a Terrain team, it could totally be a Psychic type. And this would be something like what it would run. Next up, we could have a Fairy type Weavile. Fairy type Weavile would be insanely threatening, just because the Fairy typing is so good, frankly. And you could have also had a Fighting type Weavile as well if you wanted to hit something like Heatran or a Ground type Weavile. So many options there. And then finally, what if I did an Iron Defense Body Press Fighting type Heatran? It's a little bit janky, but that would hit pretty dang hard. And then we ran Dark Pulse here for the Ghost types mostly. But, and you could, instead of Taunt, you could put like Flash Cannon or Heavy Slam there to hit Fairy types. That could be something that could be sort of cheeky. So maybe you could make the argument that something more akin to this spread would be what you should expect. But just remember that any one of these could be changed, right? It doesn't have to be that all of them are unconventional. Maybe just one of them is unconventional, or one of them just happens to be the one that beats down your entire team. And how was I supposed to expect that one? Well, you couldn't expect that random Terror type to show up. So any of the Pokemon on my opponent's team could be the one that my opponent chooses to Terastallize. My opponent could go into the battle expecting to Terastallize their Alakazam, right? That's the one that they've elected to make their designated Terramon. But getting into the battle halfway through, you're like, no, I'm in a position to let Gyarados sweep. Oh, that'll work. Let's go for it. Or maybe they load up a game and they realize that they're fighting something that's really weak to Heatran, and they decide to Terastallize that one instead. Right, it all just comes down to team matchup, and in the middle of the battle, what does my current situation look like? And again, as opposed to Dynamax, where I know what a Pokemon is capable of, right? If I'm in front of something that can max Airstream, I know that it can max Airstream, and I have to take measures to stop that. Or if I know that this would be a good time for them to max Airstream after getting +2 with Swords Dance, then I need to defensively Dynamax so I can live and KO them, right? That's something that I have to keep in the back of my head, but I know what my opponent is capable of. Since I don't know any of these typings going into the battle, I don't know what my opponent is capable of. Similarly, since I don't know what typings they are, I don't know what random wacky move they could have in the back. Remember Generation 7, when we had Z Crystals, and Pokemon could run, Supersonic Sky Strike Landorus, or they could run Gloom Doom, Heatran, and you had no way of knowing that was what it was going to be, right? Z-Dig Greninja was another one. So many things that were beating their counters that they shouldn't have been able to. And so we've got all the unpredictability of Dynamax because it's not a held item, and every Pokemon is allowed to do it. And we've got all of the craziness of Z Crystals, but more. Now, Terra Blast won't be as strong as a Z move, but probably it will be allowed to be used multiple times once they're Terastallized. And it has all that unpredictability, but more because before, at least with the Z Crystals, I knew what typings the Pokemon had access to, right? I knew Greninja had Dig and Gunk Shot and things like that. But if you're a Pokemon like Manectric, which only has access to like 2 or 3 typings of moves total, and you're like, okay, I know what Manectric can do. It can go for fire moves, electric moves, and a dark move. Great, that's all. And then all of a sudden it whips out a fairy move, and you're like, what? Where did that come from? Well, that's Terastallization in a nutshell. You can have any typing of move at any given moment, and I have no clue what typing that would be or when that moment will be. So I don't think that Terastallization will be allowed in the singles format. The doubles format, on the other hand, if I know that my opponent has a particular threatening Pokemon, I can double down on it, right? I can double up into that slot with things that will cover various Terra options. So if, for instance, I have a Landorus and the opposing side has an Azumarill and a Blacephalon, well, the Landorus could Terra into a Grass type and cover the water moves from the Blacephalon. But if the water moves from the Azumarill, rather. But if the Blacephalon and Azumarill both attack the Landorus, then the Landorus can't freely Terastallize into a Grass type, because then the fire moves will annihilate it, right? So then it comes down to type coverage and attacking into Pokemon that might otherwise be able to defensively Terastallize. But in singles, you don't have that option because it's always a 1v1, and so as soon as your Pokemon beats my Pokemon, I can no longer do anything. So just something to consider. I do want to talk about one other thing with Terastallization, and I actually want to talk about Pokemon for whom Terastallization is probably not going to be a good option. Now, we've already talked about Toxapex, and Toxapex it could have made this list. I just didn't need to put it on the list because we already talked about it. So let's talk about defensive versus offensive Pokemon and why I think that Terastallization is going to be much better offensively than defensively, especially in singles. So Buzzwole as a Pokemon is mid. It has not great speed and it has terrible Spadef. It has good defense and good attack, and its ability can be good if you use in the correct way. But really what Buzzwole is using is its defensive moves and its typing, right? The typing that Buzzwole has, that bug and fighting, gives it a lot of options against ground attackers and against opposing fighting types, amongst others. So it wants to keep that bug fighting type, right? That's what enables it to do its job. And if I have to Terastallize my Buzzwole, then the Buzzwole can no longer check the things I put it on the team specifically to check, right? This is supposed to be in Gen 8 at least, because in Gen 9, Landorus could have a flying move, and that would be scary. But in Gen 8, where it doesn't have a good flying move, this is my Landorus check, this is my Urshifu check, this is my, what else would it check in the tier? Well, I guess Blissey technically, and it will check Kartana, right? If I lose my bug fighting typing, then I can no longer check those Pokemon. Because if I turn into a pure bug type, well, that's not really that strong in the first place. So maybe just don't do that. And if I lose my, if I lose my fighting type, then I become pure bug. That wouldn't be good, but because bug is not a good defense typing. If I go pure fighting, well, that's not bad because I could spam close combat, right? Buzzwole could be like a choice scarfed attacker with close combat and just spam that until the cows come home, and then have Ice Punch or whatever else in the back is coverage. That could be fun. And a choice scarf Buzzwole that's Terastallized into a fighting type, that could be interesting. But compared to other fighting types that could also do that and probably be better at it, outside of Beast Boost, it doesn't really have too much going for it. So I don't really see Buzzwole wanting to do that. As a defensive Pokemon, I think it would much prefer to keep its powerful defensive typing. But that's just me. Corviknight is another one that I think will see this happen even more. And of course, this stands in for anything like Skarmory or Celesteela that's in a similar vein. Now, if I am a Corviknight and I get trapped by Magnezone, well, I'm probably going to die to Choice Specs Thunderbolt, or at least it's a really bad to a KO, right? I don't want to get trapped by Magnezone. So what if I Terastallize into a Grass type or into a Ground type or something like that? That could be useful, and I still have access to all of my moves that I did before, right? I can still Roost, I can still Defog, I can still U-turn. So none of that has been ruined for me. But what has been ruined is my amazing typing. Steel Flying is one of the best defensive typings, and there's a reason why. The D-Flying, of course, is decent defensive typing unto itself, and the Flying protects the Steel types from the ground, which is fantastic. The Flying type also technically protects the Steel type from the Fighting types by making that a neutral matchup. And Steel, of course, is just fantastic defensive typing generally. So you wouldn't want to lose Flying Steel typing. And remember, you put Corviknight on your team defensively for a reason, right? If you're running Hyper Offense, then you can just slap any old Pokemon on your team and go for it. But if you're running Balance or Semi-Stall or whatever, you have typings on your team to counter specific metagame threats. And if I lose that Flying Steel typing, I've lost why I put Corviknight on the team. It can still be a Defogger, it can still body press Weavile, I guess, but it's not going to be able to check things that it once was. So we know Drag Mag, for instance, is a thing, right? You use Magnezone to get rid of the Steel type so that the Dragon types can sweep. If I have forced the Corviknight to Terastallize into something that's not a Steel type, so that it's not trapped by the Magnezone, now Drag Mag is done. Magnezone has already done its job now. It has eliminated the Steel type, and now the Dragons can sweep. So now you've lost. So if I can force it to defensively Terastallize, you've lost the game. So I don't think that defensive Pokemon generally will want to Terastallize, as opposed to when Dynamax was a thing, where defensive Dynamaxing would work, because there was only 3 turns for my opponent to be big and fat and scary, and I get 3 turns to be big and fat and scary, so as long as I can weather this storm with my defensive Pokemon, everything should be fine. No, in this case, I've taken a defensive Pokemon and I forced it into a 50-50 scenario. No, it's not a 50-50, it's a catch 20-20 more so, where I have my Magnezone, you have your Corviknight out. You're trapped, you can lose your Corviknight straight up, in which case my Drag Mag sweeps you, or you can Terastallize your Corviknight, in which case my Drag Mag sweeps you, but you still have your Corviknight. So which one is the lesser of the two evils? And you'll have to make that decision. And so that punishes the defensive player more so. Melmetal is an interesting Pokemon, although Melmetal does have some defensive play. Mostly I think of Melmetal as something that wants to click one move, Double Iron Bash, right? It wants to Double Iron Bash things. If you give it the Steel typing, then I could see that working, right? A Steel type Melmetal Terastallizing into a Steel type and clicking Iron Fist boosted Double Iron Bash. That is good. But unless you're doing that, I don't think the Melmetal will want to go into any other typing. So the only typing the Melmetal should ever be choosing is the Steel type. And so at least in that regards, there will be certain Pokemon that should be fairly obvious as to which typing they will choose. And I think Melmetal is fairly obvious. The only typing it should ever be choosing is Steel. And that's it. Okay, Zapdos falls into the Corviknight scenario where the Flying type protects the electrics from the ground, and electric flying means that you don't take weak from electric, and you beat all the fighting types, and you beat the ground types even because now you're a flyer. It's really a great typing. And if you lose that, then what are you going to give up in the process? Are you going to give up your electric typing and become weak 2 electric types? Are you going to give up your flying typing? In which case, that would be an awful option. Don't do that, right? But if you give up your flying typing and become something that's not flying, then you wouldn't be weak to stealth rocks, so that might be nice. However, if you become an electric type, then you're grounded, and now the ground types will beat you handily. On the other hand, you could choose something that's neither electric nor flying, but what is that going to be? Fire? Has it got heat wave? Like, you don't have any moves outside of that to abuse, so you're going to be relying purely on Terrablast, which probably isn't a great move to have to rely on. So I don't see Zapdos becoming a bulky water and spamming Terrablast. This is the only offensive option. That doesn't seem like a good option. So I think Zapdos is another Pokemon that doesn't have any things that it wants to do outside of his designated role. And so I don't think that one will ever be something that sees a lot of Terra play. Gliscor is here over Landorus because Gliscor doesn't have the crazy attack stat that Landorus has. So Gliscor has Recovery and Roost, and it has an amazing ability in Poison Heal. But that also means that it's more inclined to stick to the defensive role. In past generations, you could have the Swords Dance Facade set, and there is still room for that in theory. But if Gliscor returns, I don't think you're going to see that be as successful as in previous generations. And Gliscor really doesn't want to give up the ground flying typing. Ground flying is one of the best combinations out there. And there's a reason why Landorus is on like 50% of teams in every generation, no matter what. Because you get 2 immunities for the price of 1. It's your electric and ground immunities rolled into 1, and there's a reason why you have to have an electric immunity on your team. You have to have a ground immunity on your team. Those move typings are too spammable and too strong if left unchecked, and you need to have it. And so if you can have a Pokemon that can do 2 for the price of 1, you always take it. And so I don't think that Gliscor will want to become a pure ground type just to get off super strong earthquakes on a Swords Dance set. I'm not going to say, oh, let's become a normal type so my facades do more damage. No, that's dumb. Don't do that. Machamp or Conkeldurr or any of those could do it way better than Gliscor could. You wouldn't be giving up one of the things that makes Gliscor a superb Pokemon. So, another example of a defensive Pokemon that I don't think we'll see any Terra play because it's giving up something too valuable. Finally, we've got Blissey. Now, Blissey doesn't have a reason to Terastallize. Why would I Terastallize a Blissey? Blissey has one job, and that's eat up special hits and be annoying and be fat. Right? The normal typing is great for a fat Pokemon like that because you take everything neutrally, except for fighting, right? And every other typing that you choose is going to have more than one weakness. So you're just going to make Blissey worse. Now, it could be argued that Clefable got better by getting the fairy typing, and so maybe you want to make Blissey a fairy type? And that could be true, but last time I checked, yeah, you don't get Moonblast as Blissey, so that's not really going to be great, because part of what makes Clefable so strong nowadays is having access to that really useful move of Moonblast with its special attack drops and its 95 base power, and Blissey doesn't have that. All it has is a really bad 75 special attack stat that it never invests in. And so it always wants to do Seismic Toss, and Seismic Toss doesn't care about what typing you are. So you're not going to get a salve on it. Anyway, no matter what typing you are. So Terastallizing into the normal type doesn't give you anything. Terastallizing into any other type just makes you weaker defensively. So if you have to Terastallize into something to eat some specific special hit, right? Maybe there's a really powerful water type on the opposing side of the field, and you can Terastallize into becoming your own water type because water is a pretty good defensive typing, and so that's the one you chose going into the battle. Then I guess you could do that, and technically Blissey could still do his job, but it seems like such a waste when you have 6 Pokemon and the one you're going to Terastallize is the one that doesn't have any offensive moves and is going to use that defensively, but worse than what it currently was doing. Not only that, but you have to choose the Terra type going in. And I think you'll always want to choose a good, appropriate Terra type just in case you have to. But really, I don't see Blissey ever using Terastallizing. So, at the end of the day, looking at this list, one thing you'll notice is that a lot of these Pokemon are defensive. Melmetal is the only exception to this, other than maybe Buzzwole, but even Buzzwole, we said, might choose the fighting type and choose like a Scarf Close Combat set, which could be fun. And Melmetal, if it decides to Terastallize, would just choose Steel. And maybe on a Trick Room set, that could be really oppressive, I don't know. But most of the Pokemon that are going to be scary offensive are going to be offensive. You think about Dragapult or Dragonite. Maybe they whip out a ground Terra type or a fire Terra type and start busting through the steel types that are giving them problems. Dragapult doesn't even have to worry about running Shadow Ball because it's not that strong of a move. Of course, it's nice to hit things neutrally with that ghost typing, but now all of a sudden it's a pure electric type and just throwing off thunderbolts right, left, and center. Or thunder and rain, right? That'd be really scary. Kartana could change its typing to become a psychic type and get a Psycho Cut powered up or something like that. Or a fighting type and turn Sacred Sword into Stab finally. Or it could just make Leaf Blade a super powerful move by Terra typing into Grass, and that would be even scarier, and it couldn't get trapped by a Magnezone. That would be bad. Mew, all of a sudden, has access to every single type in the game, so do with that information with what you will. And you know, you can go down the list and you can look at it. Tornadus might want to Terastallize into something, maybe, but I don't know, that would be Dark, maybe for powerful knockoffs. I don't know. But yeah, I think a lot of the scarier ones are going to be the more offensive Pokemon, right? Or maybe Terastallizes into an electric type to get strong Plasma Fists, or Terastallizes into an ice type to give it an ice move to beat down Landorus, right? And the fact that you don't know which one it's going to do, that's the problem. Whereas if a defensive Pokemon Terastallizes, it doesn't have any immediate overbearing presence over what it previously had, so that's not as scary. If a Corviknight said, oh, all of a sudden now I'm a ground type, who cares? Cool, now you're ground type. And that didn't threaten me offensively. And on all of these Pokemon that are defensive, almost all of them rely on their dual coverage, or their dual typing, to give them the proper typing they need to beat you, right? Flying Steel is good. Electric Flying is good. Ground Flying is good. The Bug Fighting combination is good, even though neither of those would be good defensive typings normally. And then, of course, there's Bliss. Bliss is an anomaly. So I don't think that most defensive Pokemon are going to be as strong of Terastallizers as the offensive ones, which is where this takes a hard left turn from what Dynamax did, because defensively Dynamaxing would often work, but I don't think defensive Terastallization is going to be really much of a thing, because it's going to lose the role that Pokemon had before, whereas an offensive one can choose going in what role it wants to play. Anyway, I rambled on long enough, but by now hopefully I've convinced you of the power imbalance and the really scary amount of unpredictability that Terastallization brings to the game, and as to why I personally feel that Terastallization will have to get banned at Gen 9. Now, 2 years from now, we could look back at this video and laugh and be like, ha ha ha, you didn't realize this and this, and you're such a silly Ralts. And that's fine if that happens. I will stand by it. But as far as the information we have now, just looking at it logically, I don't see how this could create a stable and playable metagame that wouldn't just reward blind. It would just be like playing Ranbats all the time, right? Where, oh, I lost my only defensive check to the team because they Terastallized into this one random typing that I didn't expect them to have, right? It's going to be a lot of that. And I don't think that anybody wants to play a metagame like that. So that'll be it for me today, and I'll catch you guys next time.